A flat cap. What does a flat salary cap do to your team? Well, I've got all 31 teams on this board. Yes, I've got the big board out for this one because I was going to try to do it on the regular size board and it just wasn't going to fit. So I thought about using the vertical board and I thought, if I use the vertical board, it doesn't quite fit on there. I'm going to be kind of choked. So here we are with the 40 by 30 inch board for anybody who's curious. And let's go through it. So the team that's at the top of the board is the one that, according to Cap Friendly, and according to Sportac, has got the worst cap situation next year, and then all down towards the bottom. It's all organized by Sportac, and then I put in the numbers from Cap Friendly. So there's a little bit of a difference between the two sites, but it's really close. So Arizona, interestingly enough, for next year has $37.3 million spent on forwards, $24.1 million spent on the blue line, and $8.75 million spent on goaltenders. Their cap hit currently $80 million. Now, there's going to be money that comes off of there for long-term injured reserve. People are going to bring this up, and that's fine. I'm just using this as a guide. So $80 million, and Taylor Hall stands out as a potential UFA. Thus, he is in blue as the guy who may very well leave. The guys in red are guys that if they decide to try to save money, may very well find themselves on the trade block. Stepan stands out with that $6.5 million cap hit just for the production, and that cap hit may very well be available. And Grabner, $3.35 million. Again, much the same thing. That's about $10 million between those two players. Arizona could very well find themselves saying, hey, we could move some of this money out. The other part of the picture as well, owners looking to save some money this coming year. St. Louis, $43.9 million spent on their forwards, $18.4 million on their blue line, $8.75 million spent on goaltending, $79.5 million for next year on cap, according to Cap Friendly. So they only have $2 million in cap space. Remember, the cap, $81.5 million. So both St. Louis and Arizona are right up against it. Alex Pietrangelo stands out as a guy who probably finds his way out of town unless he's willing to stay for less money or signs a one-year contract. Steen at $5.75 million may find himself on the block. Bozak at $5 million may find himself on the block. And I included Jake Allen's $4.35 million because they may very well be able to bring in a backup for $1 million and let go of Allen, which would free up another $3.35 million, and maybe that would be enough to get Pietrangelo with some other moves being made as well. It's going to be some creative bookkeeping to get him to stick around. Toronto. The Toronto Maple Leafs are spending more money on their forwards than anybody else in the league. $50.7 million. And that's problematic. And if you're a Leafs fan, you're saying, no, it's good because all those guys deserve all that money. Fine, but then it makes it difficult to have that blue line that matches up. Their blue line costs $15 million for next year, $6.65 million on goaltending. They're at $76.9 million for next year's cap. Tyson Barrie stands out as the guy who's going to probably leave as an RFA. And it's between Johnsson and Kapanen, who could very well find themselves on the block. Johnsson at $3.4 million. It's possible they move him out to save some money. So either they can bring Barrie back or they can do something else on the blue line. But they have to do something on the blue line. Tampa's spending $49 million on their forwards next year, $16.3 million on their blue line, $10.8 million on goaltending. It's some expensive goaltending, understandably so. Their cap, $76.2 million for next season. Now, their free agent situation, there aren't any big UFAs. However, RFAs, there's a couple. Cirelli and Sergachev are both due to get paid and potentially being casualties to make that happen. For me, McDonough stands out with $6.75 million on his cap hit, and Yanni Gourde with $5.17 million. So, yeah, we'll see what Tampa does this summer, or this fall, I guess, with their cap space, and finding more of it. I don't think Vancouver's going to be taking that phone call, not this year. Anaheim, $35 million being spent on their forward group, $16.8 million on the blue line, $6.4 million in net. So why are they at this level? LTIR. $75.7 million altogether, but Kessler's $6.8 million is going to come off. So they're technically artificially inflated to this level. That $6.88 million to Kessler's going to come off of there. Ryan Miller's the most notable UFA for them. And cap space, if they decide they need it, Backus, $4.5 million. That's not a great cap hit. So Goodbranson at $4 million. That's $8.5 million between Backus and Goodbranson. So if the Ducks ever decide they need cap space, that may be where they try to find it. Vegas, $42.8 million being spent on their forward group, $20.1 million on their blue line, $7.8 million in goal. Grand total $75.9 million. Robin Lehner, he's a UFA this summer. Can Vegas figure out a way to keep him? That's the big thing. They need to figure out a way to have a goaltender who can replace Marc-Andre Fleury, because that's important. And looking for contracts they can get rid of, I couldn't really come up with one that I thought stood out as, oh, this guy could go. Even though they're spending a lot of money, and they're going to have to spend some money to keep Lehner, I don't think they're in necessarily a situation where they have a really bad contract. Eventually, maybe Stone's contract looks bad. Maybe Pacioretty's ends up looking bad. But for right now, they're not in bad shape. Columbus, surprisingly, this high up on the list. $35 million for their forwards. $26.2 million on their blue line. They spend a lot of money in the blue line, rightfully so. And $6.8 million on their goaltending. So Columbus has $75.1 million spent for next season. And Dubois is that RFA that's sitting out there. So Dubois is an RFA. Wenberg, $4.9 million. Hit that contract, looks expensive. Murray's, I believe, is up next summer or next fall. $4.6 million. It's going to take a while for me to get used to that. And Ryan Murray, $4.6 million. So that's $9.5 million between those two players. Almost every team has two contracts you can add up and you go, really? They're paying that much for those two guys? Yeah, there you go. So if Columbus ends up needing more space, Wenberg or Murray could be the guys who end up on the block. Chicago, $42 million spent on their forwards next year, $16.8 million on the blue line. They haven't spent a cent on their goaltending yet. Nothing. So they're at a $74.1 million cap hit right now without a goaltender signed for next year because Crawford's UFA. Do believe that Subban's just RFA next summer, but Subban's not really a starter. And Kubalik is RFA this summer. How much is Kubalik worth? So Blackhawk fans that are all like, hey, he should be in there for Rookie of the Year, would then look at that and go, you know what? If he wins the Calder, he gets more money. Maybe it's better if he doesn't. So Seabrook's contract is still on this team, $6.88 million till 2024. That contract is virtually impossible to get rid of at this stage. And with the cap staying flat for the next couple of years after this one, that gets more problematic. Notice I'm only talking about this year. I'm not talking about beyond this year, because honestly, once you get into not this summer, but the summer after that, there are a lot of teams that are in cap trouble that aren't near the top of this board, including the Canucks. So Carolina, we'll move on to them. $39.1 million spent on their forwards, $14.6 million spent on the blue line, $6.53 million spent on their goaltending. Both goaltenders are still signed for next year. $72.4 million overall on their cap. So they, again, would like to thank the Montreal Canadiens that Sebastian Aho's contract didn't break them. But Edmondson and Vatanen are both UFA this summer. I think they'll try to keep Edmondson. I think Vatanen probably goes UFA again this fall. Niederreiter, 5.25. Don't make that a drinking game. You'll be absolutely blotto within like 5 minutes of my video starting. Niederreiter, $5.25 million for him. Gardner, $4.05 million. Jake Gardner's had a miserable season, and combined Niederreiter and Gardner make $9 million. On the Nashville Predators, they spent $44.7 million on their forward group, which so far is one of the higher totals, just behind Tampa and Toronto and ahead of St. Louis. $20.7 million on their blue line, $6.5 million on their goaltending, $72.2 million is spent for next year. Granlund and Smith stand as guys who are due for contracts this coming fall. There we go, I said fall. Nice. And of course, Craig Smith had a very good year. So how much is that worth? Can they keep him? Granlund probably leaves. Maybe he sticks around for a year or two. Kyle Turris is $6 million. It's still not a great contract. It's still something I think Nashville would like to move on from. Islanders, $45.1 million spent on their forward group, $16.3 million spent on the blue line, $5 million in goal, $71.4 million overall for next year's cap. This is going to be a challenge. The Islanders have a problem in that Thomas Greiss is a free agent this summer, fall. It's going to take forever. Ryan Pulock is an RFA this fall. And Matthew Barzal. So I don't think there's any concern right now with Barzal getting an offer sheet unless somebody like Ottawa or Detroit or somebody were to wade in that we don't expect. But Barzal, he's due for a huge raise over that $860,000 he made this season. And he rightfully deserves more than $860,000. And while they have $10 million in cap for next year, you have to think if they're going to sign Barzal and Pulock, Greiss is completely ruled out. Because Pulock and Barzal have to equal $10 million put together, you would think. Oilers $42.6 million on their forward group, $18.8 million on their blue line, $4.5 million in goal, $71.4 million for them next year as well. Mike Smith is a free agent this summer. They're going to have to replace him in net. Ethan Bear's an RFA this summer, and the discussion of how much he's worth and what kind of contract he can look for is being waged online. And James Neal's contract is still not great, $5.75 million. I know he had a good start to his season with Edmonton, but he faded, and it's not a great contract. The Capitals, $52 million in their forward group. It's noteworthy that $9.5 million of that goes to Ovechkin, of course, and yet still their forward group being more expensive than Toronto's. They're the only one with a more expensive forward group than Toronto's. It's interesting, too, because Toronto's forward group was listed as the most expensive on one site I was looking at, but I think that's just straight salaries. Toronto's paying the most. Cap hit, they're actually below Washington. $18.1 million on the blue line, $925,000 in net. Some cheap goaltending with Samsonov being the only one signed for next year. $71.1 million in cap spent. Of course, Holtby's an RFA once the seasons come to an end. And to me, Oshie's contract stands out as one that may not be fantastic. That one's $5.75 million till 2025. I think that contract will get progressively more questionable. I understand it was worth it for the 2018 Stanley Cup, and I agree. But going forward, that contract may become a problem with a flat cap. Philly, going back to the top of the board, $38.3 million for their forwards, $20.3 million for their blue line, $731,000 for their goaltenders. Yep. Because Elliott's expiring this summer, so who are they going to bring in? They have spent $69.5 million for next year, so they have a lot of cap space, $12 million. But Lindblom is an RFA this fall. I'm never going to get used to that, am I? Nah. Gostisbehere, $4.5 million. Yeah, he'll still probably find himself on the block. I could see Ghost going to one of the teams that's at the bottom of this board to try to help their blue line. He could be a really good reclamation project because, honestly, we can remember just how good he's been at his peak. Pittsburgh, $41.9 million spent on their forward group, $20.3 million on their blue line. Nothing spent on goaltending. Nothing for next year. So $68.3 million, but that's a little bit deceptive because, Murray and Jari are both restricted free agents this summer. They both, you would think, have to make, $3 million each? I'm just saying just minimum. So that'd be $6 million. That'll put them up to 74. Justin Schultz expires when this season comes to an end. And Jared McCann, who only made $1.125 million. Everybody's talked about how great he looks and what a bargain he is. I'm sure he agrees, and we'll see what him and his agent come up with when they start negotiations with the Penguins. And Jack Johnson's $3.25 million until 2023 still stands out as not necessarily a great contract. But, again, they've been trying to trade him for a while. We'll see if there's a taker going into next season. San Jose. San Jose for next season has spent $25.6 million on their forward group. $18.2 million on their blue line, but not really. Not really. Again, this is just cap-friendly numbers. $5.75 million on their goaltending. $66.6 million in cap for next year has been eaten up. But that $11.5 million for Erik Karlsson is all on the IR. So in reality, their blue line costs them $29, almost $30 million. That is prohibitively expensive for the blue line, makes it difficult to round out the rest of your team. Dell is an expiring free agent when the season comes to an end, which, of course, it has for San Jose. But, of course, I'm talking about like November 1st when everybody's free. Dell will be likely free. Or is he? LeBanc is an RFA. He has to be kind of kicking himself a little bit. Because last year he could have cashed in. He went, no, I'm going to take a cheaper contract, stay in San Jose. And now, pandemic, is holding all the costs down. And now it may cost him or he just signs another 1 year, $1.5 million contract. Joe Thornton. If he decides to come back, he likely does. Likely won't cost them a ton, but he's a standout as a guy who may very well leave. Martin Jones at $5.75 million until 2024. Yeah, that's a lot of money to spend for Jones, considering the last couple of seasons he's had. And Carlson's $11.5 million forever. I don't have to put a date after that. You guys know it's forever, and it's a lot of money on a blue line that already was spending a lot of money on Brent Burns. So we'll see how things go for San Jose from here. Winnipeg, $43.6 million spent on their forward group, $10.9 million on their blue line, which is pretty darn cheap. $6.17 million spent in goal, $65.9 million for next year. However, restricted free agent Jack Roslovic kind of stands out. I like Roslovic a lot. How much is he going to get and for how long? And Kulikov, Beaulieu, and DeMello are just notables on the blue line that are expiring. So they're going to have to bring in more blue line help. I could see some big-name blue liners ending up there. Now, Little, with his $5.29 million cap hit until 2024, does stand out. So if you're a Jets fan, yep, Brian Little's contract to me is the one that stands out as probably being too high and definitely for too long. Minnesota, $32 million spent on their forward group, $28.2 million on their blue line. That is expensive for the blue line. $5.12 million in net. And $65.3 million spent overall for next season. Unrestricted free agent this summer, fall, Mikko Koivu. I'll just keep saying summer. Forget it. I'm not going to change. They can change. Luke Cunnin is an RFA this coming off season. And we will see with Koivu and Cunnin what happens. Now, in terms of bad contracts, Parise, who they were ready to move to the Islanders, but if you're Lou, let's just revisit that. If you're Lou Lamoriello, why in the world would you pick up Parise's contract when there's a flat cap for the next couple of years, and you've got Barzal and Pulock you got to keep, and you've already got Ladd's contract at $5.5 million and Boychuk's at $6 million, which I didn't even cover when I talked about the Islanders. That's $11.5 million for Boychuk and Ladd. I'm a huge Boychuk fan. He's not worth $6 million right now, and it's not likely going to get a lot better. So the Parise contract, which is $7.54 million until 2025, moving that to the Islanders, that would be a horrible decision for Lou unless he's able to get Minnesota to take back money or take back, say, like Ladd's contract. Something to move money around, because otherwise it's just not going to work. And if you're a Minnesota fan, you're probably saying, why would we do that? Exactly. And of course, Victor Rask, $4 million. I have Niederreiter on the board. I have Rask on the board. It all checks out. Calgary, $42 million spent on their forward group, $16.3 million on their blue line, $2.75 million in net, $64.6 million overall being spent next year by the Calgary Flames so far. Mangiapane's an RFA, and we'll see how much he's able to get. I love Mangiapane. On the blue line, they have Brody, Hamonic, and Gustafsson are all UFAs. I would think 2 out of the 3 probably come back. Your guess is as good as mine on the 2. I would try to keep Gustafsson as one of those 2, just because I think Gustafsson, pretty solid defenseman, underrated. Lucic is $5.25 million until 2023. Still stands out as not a fantastic contract. Rangers, $30.3 million spent on their forward group thus far. $19.9 million on the blue line and $9.43 million in net. $67.1 million spent for next season. So again, I tried to get these all in an order according to a website, and Cap Friendly didn't have a way to put the 2020, 2021 ones in order that I was able to find. But the Rangers, $67.1 million. D'Angelo's RFA at the end of the season, as is Ryan Strome. They're both RFAs. How much are they going to get? That'll lead into the cap space. Lundqvist, $8.5 million for one last season. They're probably going to be able to eat that $8.5 million in cap space for one more year. And Brendan Smith at $4.35 million is too expensive. So combined between the two, that's almost $13 million for Lundqvist and Smith. Boston, $40.4 million up front, $12.4 million on the blue line, $9.25 million in net, $63.5 million spent for next year. They're very fortunate that guys like Pasternak and Bergeron and Marchand didn't try to cash in when their contracts were up because otherwise Boston wouldn't have a chance. Krug is UFA, Chara's UFA, Grzelcyk is RFA, and DeBrusk is RFA. So yes, they have currently got $18 million in cap space for next year. If they're going to try to keep all four of those players, that's going to be a challenge. Depending on what Krug wants and for how long, that's going to be a challenge. Krejci, $7.25 million contract. It's too expensive for Krejci at this point. I would think if they could find a taker for Krejci once the season's done, I would think they would do it. And if you find a taker for Krejci and you can save some of that money, Krug likely then sticks around with Boston, which is what I think he and the team both want. Vancouver, $37.7 million on their forwards, $14.9 million spent on their blue line, $1.05 million spent in net for a total of $63.5 million spent for next season. Markstrom, Toffoli, Levo, Tanev, all UFAs. So them having $18 million in cap space, not really, because they're going to have to replace those players if they can't keep them. Markstrom, you got to keep Markstrom. You got to think, what, $6.5, $7 million for Markstrom? That takes down their cap space pretty quick. Tanev wants to stick around, and then it's a matter of Virtanen being an RFA as well. And then you got to look at the other restricted free agents that are going to come up in Hughes and Pettersson. So, again, Vancouver, it looks like they have a ton of cap space. They really don't. They really, really don't. Because Pettersson, they don't want to lose. Definitely Quinn Hughes. You don't want to be losing him either. And so Eriksson at $6 million and Brandon Sutter at $4.38 million. And I like Sutter, but Sutter and Eriksson costing over $10 million to the team, that hurts. That really does. Dallas, $40.5 million on their forward group, $16.2 million on the blue line, $4.92 million in net. Total is $62 million. Yeah, Boston, Vancouver, and Dallas were all listed in a row. Hudobin's a UFA, and then Gurianov and Hintz are both RFAs. It'll be interesting to see what happens with them for the Dallas Stars. Jamie Benn, $9.5 million till 2025. I don't think he lived up to the $9.5 million so far this season. We'll see what happens with the playoffs. But so far, it looks like that contract may end up being a weight around their necks by next year or the year after. And Pavelski at $7 million probably didn't live up to that contract so far. Montreal, $27.8 million spent on their forward group, $23.3 million on the blue line, $11.3 million in net, total of $63.1 million. And of course, Max Domi is a restricted free agent at the end of the season. So, Max Domi, we'll see what he gets. And for your combined here, Shea Weber at $7.86 million for a long time yet. Carl Alsner, $4.63 million for 2 more years. That means Weber and Alsner make a combined $12 million. So again, I mean, they can bury Alsner in the minors, but that only gives them a limited amount of cap relief. But again, Montreal doesn't really have a whole lot of concerns. So this is where things change. Montreal is a team that could absolutely look at one of these guys that I've got on the board in red and say, hey, we'll help you out with your cap situation. But we want to get more draft picks in return. We want that prospect thrown in as well. So Montreal may very well be able to help somebody else out in exchange for helping themselves out too. Florida, $20.7 million spent on the forward group, $25 million spent on the blue line, $10.9 million spent in net, $60.5 million overall. But keep in mind, Florida's ownership was rumored to already be looking at reducing the budget for next season. If they were already looking at reducing the budget for next season, what did the pause do to them? What's going to happen going into next year if they're already losing a lot of money? So Hoffman and Dadonov are both UFAs. I would think Dadonov would probably be cheaper, and I think he's probably the one they keep. Bobrovsky's $10 million cap hit already looks like it could be problematic. Keith Yandel at $6.35 million. I thought about Ekblad, but you know what, Ekblad, really good young defenseman. I can't see them moving him. Yandel, I possibly could because of age. And so if Florida's looking to cut back on some salary, the fact that Bobrovsky and Yandel are combined to $16 million, that could be a problem. LA, $29.6 million on their forward group, $13.5 million on the blue line, $6.66 million in net, according to Cap Friendly. $60.8 million spent for next season. LA could be in on this. LA could be a team that goes out to somebody else and goes, hey, so you got that contract you don't like. We've got cap space. LA could be one of those teams. Walker's an RFA. That's the most notable RFA for them. Brown at $5.88 million, Carter at $5.27 million. I think they've been trying to get rid of Carter's contract, but I don't think Carter wants to go, and he has the right to refuse. And Jonathan Quick's $5.8 million till 2023. Quick's best days are behind him, but I understand they traded Campbell, meaning Quick's going to stay as the starter, but that $5.8 million, we'll see if that causes them any trouble going forward. But LA, honestly, is doing pretty well when it comes to the cap right now. Colorado, $21.1 million spent on their forward group, $16.1 million on the blue line, $2 million spent on their goaltending for next year. That does not include Grubauer, who was on the IR at the time of the pause. $59.1 million spent for next year under the cap. They have all this cap space, and all year everybody's like, why don't they trade their cap space? Now they look brilliant, don't they? Joe Sakic looks brilliant. So Nichushkin's RFA, Graves' RFA, and Burakovsky's RFA. And how much those guys get could decide very well just how much Colorado's able to do over the offseason and which players they might pick up. Maybe now, maybe they will pick up a contract from somebody else in exchange for something that they need. Because I couldn't find a bad contract on Colorado. Not one. I couldn't find a contract on Colorado that I said, well, that's prohibitive. New Jersey, $28.9 million spent on their forward group, $18.4 million spent on their blue line, and $6 million spent on their goaltending. $55.3 million spent towards next year's cap. Mackenzie Blackwood's an RFA this offseason. And Subban stands out as the $9 million whoops. But it's not their whoops. And they've also got Corey Schneider at $6 million as well. So that's $15 million for Subban and Schneider. That might be an ouch. At some point in time, I may do a video on, the two combined salaries that are most shocking on any given team. And the two that seem like the biggest bargain. Can't be an entry-level contract if you're going to talk about the biggest bargains. New Jersey, I already talked about New Jersey. Move along, Shannon. Buffalo, $29.5 million spent on their forward group, $14 million on the blue line, $2.75 million in net, $47 million spent overall. Buffalo has tons of space. But Olmark's an RFA, Olofsson's an RFA, Reinhardt's RFA, Montour is an RFA. So Kevin Adams has a job to do now when it comes to deciding who's going to make what. And once these four guys get signed, how much cap space have they eaten up? And then what else can Buffalo do in order to improve? Again, Buffalo may be in a position to pick up somebody else. Now, they do have other roster spots they're going to need to fill, obviously. But really, this is a good spot for a brand new GM to come in and maybe build a team in a new image and try to change things out. So we'll see. Detroit, $24.3 million spent on their forwards for next year. $5.3 million spent on their blue line. 5.36. $3 million spent on their goaltending. $46.3 million overall spent for next year. That's pretty darn good. Mantha's RFA, Bertuzzi's RFA, Fabry's RFA as well. So those are three restricted free agents they're going to have to deal with. And try not to overpay Fabry based on just that the games he had in Detroit. Try to be fair on that. And Jimmy Howard leaves as a UFA. They're going to need another goaltender. Nielsen at $5.25 million and Abdelkader at $4.25 million. $9.5 million for those two is too high. And yet, Detroit's not in any kind of cap problem. So Detroit could take on a bad contract, potentially. So we'll see. Ottawa, $17.5 million spent on their forward group, $14.9 million spent on their blue line, and only $700,000 going to goaltending for next year thus far. Again, this is not including guys on LTIR. $41.9 million spent towards the cap for next year. So they're going to need to get to the floor. Borowiecki, Craig Anderson are both UFAs this summer/fall. And Anthony Duclair's an RFA, but there's no reason to be concerned that they can't afford him. And Bobby Ryan's $7.25 million cap hit is still too high. And I'm not saying anything negative about him in general, just it is a high cap hit considering the amount of scoring that he provides and everything else. But they can afford it. So there you go. Teams that may or may not be in cap trouble. And let me know which teams you think are going to have the biggest issues once we do reach November. And you got to start trying to figure out next season's cap. And there may very well be a very short off season to get it all straightened out. Which teams do you think are going to have trouble? And which ones do you think are going to take advantage of it? Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. And hey, thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.